This should not have been possible. In one of the most competitive running events, two runners from Norway took the silver and bronze. At the same time, the Norwegian triathletes are taking their sports to new heights. So how has this country with only 5 million people come to dominate some of the biggest endurance sports in the world? Believe me, although I live here in Norway, I'm not as biased as you might think. I'm from Sweden, and it's always frustrating when Norway is better than Sweden in stuff. But I and everybody else can't deny that the Norwegian endurance athletes must be doing a lot of things right. As a coach and athlete myself, I'm very interested in the training that produces these kind of amazing results. And I found this document right here that explains the Norwegian training method in great detail. And I'm sure there are things in here that all of us can learn a lot from. So here are 6 takeaways from the Norwegian method. Many runners think that this more scientific approach of endurance training with lots of testing, controlling the intensity and doing double threshold training days started with the Ingebrigtsen brothers. But they were actually inspired by another Norwegian runner and took a lot of things from him when they first started developing their training program. And that guy is Marius Bakken, who was Norway's best 5,000 meter runner when he was active in the early 2000s, and he ended up running a 13:06 5,000 meter, and after his running career he had become a doctor. And he really had this scientific approach during his running career that led him to do lots of testing on himself and also others, trying to learn what worked and what didn't. And last year he wrote this really long article I have here explaining the Norwegian method in great detail. So how did Bakken apply this more scientific approach to his training? Besides using the regular commonly used heart rate monitoring, he pioneered the use of these kind of lactate meters during his career. He did 5,500 of these blood tests on himself during his career. And he even brought his testing equipment to Kenya to test on the top Kenyan runners that was dominating the sport at the time, to see what intensity they were training at. So what you measure with this machine is that you take a small blood sample to see how much lactate you have in your blood. And this gives you a really reliable indication of your training intensity. And by this scientific approach, Bakken learned that the sweet spot for his harder workouts and his interval training was a lower intensity than he and most other runners thought at the time. Because if he ran the interval sessions in a more controlled manner, a bit lower than his lactate threshold, he found that his body could do a lot more of these kind of workouts compared to if the intensity was just a bit higher. Besides this approach to controlling the intensity, measuring a lot and doing lots of tests on your body all year round, being adapted by most elite Norwegian runners, later on it has also been a big part of the training philosophy of the Norwegian triathletes. So more than 20 years ago, Bakken started with this high volume threshold training approach that at the time actually was a bit controversial. But he believed in his system and quickly got the results that no Norwegian runner had been able to get before him. I grew up as an athlete in Sweden in the same area, and I was always coached that interval training should always be close to all out, really pushing to the limit. So I can see how this was controversial in a way. Besides that, Bakken found out what he thought was the optimal training intensity for his workouts, he also found that the best way to do a lot of it was to block it into doing 2 of these threshold interval sessions in one single day, and typically doing 2 of these days every single week. And nowadays this concept of double threshold interval days has become very popular and adapted by many runners also outside of Norway. And it is mainly the success of the Ingebrigtsen brothers, with especially Jakob's insane results, that has made this concept so popular. Jakob started training from a very young age with his older brothers, so although he is still a really young athlete. He has been in this high volume threshold training system for a long time, and the results he's having is just incredible. So the main theory behind why this works so good for so many athletes using this method is that even though you run your hard workouts a bit slower to what runners traditionally have done, you run fast enough for it to still be specific enough for your racing pace, and you can do a lot more volume of this compared to the slightly harder versions without the same injury or overtraining risks. Running a lot at this sweet spot will improve your aerobic fitness and lactate threshold, meaning that you can simply run faster and faster without accumulating a lot of lactic acid in your blood. The Norwegian triathletes also do these kind of double threshold interval days, getting really high volumes of training at this intensity. So what if you don't have this kind of expensive equipment to monitor that you don't run too fast on your hard workouts? I think for us non-elite runners, you can for sure use this concept without monitoring and testing your blood during every single session. If you train on it, I think you can learn to know what feeling you're supposed to have on these sessions. Of course, it will not be as exact, but one could also argue that for non-elite runners to not step over that lactate threshold is not as important, because you probably do less training and have more time to recover to the next session. You rarely see runners following the Norwegian method do continuous speed sessions. You always see them splitting up the hard workouts into intervals. This is mainly because when splitting it into intervals, you can run at a higher speed, closer to your race pace, without going over your lactate threshold. A typical double threshold day in the Norwegian training system looks something like this. In the morning you run 5 times 6 minutes with 1 minute rest, followed by 10 times 3 minutes with 1 minute rest in the afternoon. And you allow yourself to have a bit higher lactate in the afternoon, but still well below that lactate threshold. In the article that Bakken has written, he also states that only doing the threshold work split up into shorter intervals is an approach that works well when training for distances from 1500 meters to the 10K, but he thinks that runners training for marathons most probably need some longer workouts that are not split into intervals to get a relevant stimuli. Here I am, a Swede sitting on my treadmill. But you often see Norwegians on treadmills for some reason, and you could think it's because it's so cold outside here, especially during winter time. But there are actually other reasons they incorporate a lot of treadmill running all year round. The first being that it's a really easy way to standardize things on the treadmill, especially if you use the same treadmill in the same room and have the same room temperature for every session. So you will more easily be able to hit your correct pace for your workout and be able to compare from other sessions and hopefully see an improvement session to session. But what I found really interesting in Bakken's article is that he also thinks the use of treadmill running has benefits when it comes to your running technique. And there are actually some studies to support this. That when running on a treadmill, your vertical displacement is lowered, and also your steps per minute, basically your step frequency, is increased. And both of these things are factors known to improve your running economy, so running on a treadmill might actually be a good way of training this. Me personally used to really hate treadmill running, and I still of course prefer running outside on beautiful trails and in the forest. But I have been incorporating some more threshold training sessions on the treadmill. And I think it's a really easy way to get quality training sessions done at the correct intensity, and have even sort of started to like doing intervals on this thing. It's hard making one of these videos where I talk about running training without mentioning this point, that the easy runs should be easy enough. Because this also holds true when we talk about the Norwegian method. Because if you do a lot of those high volume days with a lot of threshold running, if the easy days with easy running isn't easy enough, you won't be able to withstand in this sort of system. Bakken suggests that you shouldn't have a higher heart rate than 70% of your maximum heart rate when you do your easy runs that surrounds the tougher days. Okay, so all of these training principles used in the Norwegian method hopefully sound pretty logical and good, but the runners using the Norwegian method never do those kind of training sessions where they push themselves really hard closer to that race effort to train on that. They of course do, actually quite a lot when they get closer to their competitions. They do sessions closer to that race effort while maintaining some of their threshold work. But also during the base training, on one sessions every single week, they allow themselves to go over that lactate threshold to also stimulate that sort of energy system. The Ingebrigtsens famously do this one harder workout every week as an uphill interval session, and there are some really good reasons to why they do it in an uphill. I actually made a whole video where I copied this single training session and talked about why I think it's so good. If you want to check out that, you can click here. And if you want to read that great article that Marius Bakken wrote, there's a link to that in the description down below. Thanks for watching, train smart, have fun, and I'll see you in the next video.